Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Let Them Eat Cake. This will be the second of 2 episodes covering the region of Kurdistan that is home to the Kurdish people who are considered the largest group without a state. In part 2, we speak to an American-born Kurd about the foreign opinions of the Kurds, the Kurdish identity as a whole, and the American life as a Kurd, among other subjects. As for us, we are 5th Gen, an information warfare cooperative that aims to shed light on things those in power want to be kept in the dark. We want to give a voice to the voiceless and give people the information that they need to thrive in today's fast-paced society. I am Jack, my co-host is John, and we hope you enjoy the show.
We have a weapon more powerful than the British Empire, and that weapon is our refusal to bow to any order but our own, any institution but our own.
My name is Lava. I'm originally from the U.S., from California, but both my parents are from Bashur, the southern part of Kurdistan, northern Iraq. Both my parents are Kirkuki, but my mom was born and raised in Hawler, and my dad was born and raised in Kirkuk. But my father immigrated a lot throughout his life. He was a refugee in different places, whereas my mom, not so much. She kind of immigrated there when I was born, and then I moved back and forth from Kurdistan to the U.S.
What made your father a refugee?
My father's a bit older, so it was like 2 things. One was obviously the genocide. Another thing was at the time the mandatory military instatement. So at the time, Sweden was one of the first countries to accept Kurdish refugees. So allowed my dad to move to Sweden when a lot of Kurds didn't get that opportunity.
Did you feel disconnected at any point from your Kurdish identity?
Personally, me not so much. I know my siblings felt a huge disconnect towards their culture. But not so much, which is funny because growing up, my dad was terrified of us having accents. So he really wanted us to be immersed in like American culture. And at the time, I live in SoCal. I live in San Diego. The time there wasn't a huge population outside of, white Americans. It wasn't until after the war in Iraq and Saddam Hussein's death that a bunch of Iraqi refugees came over. But I don't know. I never really felt that. I've always felt more Kurdish than American.
How old are you? But are you the oldest? Is there a middle sibling, a younger sibling?
Yeah. For my mom, I'm the oldest, but my dad had a previous marriage, so I'm the second youngest for my father. My older siblings are half Arab, and their mom came here when came to the States when she was about 11. So she's more Americanized. But my little sister, there's a 2-year age gap, a year and a half, 2-year age gap between me and her. And I think it was easier for her to immerse herself, whereas I was born right before 9/11, and right when it happened, I kind of got that end of the stick where Americans really like to push to you. You're not American. You look very different from us. Mm-hmm. So I think that pushed me more towards my Kurdish side.
Let's talk the concept of whiteness in America.
Mm-hmm.
Literally a racy question here. Does your sister feel that she's more white than Kurdish?
I wouldn't necessarily say that she thinks she's white. And her perspective, all of my siblings' perspectives changed except for my brothers. And the older they got, the more they came into terms with how they look and what they identify with. Racially, if we're thinking about just your physical appearance, we were never very white. So I don't think my sister ever thought she was white. I think she always said she was brown, but connected more with an American culture.
So the whole concept of whiteness is needs to be like destroyed and buried anyway.
Oh, because racially Middle Eastern people are white, right?
It's all
in the
North
US.
Africans. So it's like, I'm Irish. I talk about this every episode. Our intro is literally Easter Rising. We weren't white when we came over, and you ever see, like, you'll see it with New York and Boston, right? And you'll see these cops, and they're like, I'm 6th generation cop.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason for that, and that's because they took the Irish, and the Irish were a buffer from the black neighborhoods to the Italian neighborhoods. So then the Italian neighborhoods were a buffer from the Irish neighborhoods to the white neighborhoods. You'll hear a lot of people who think just because they're Irish, they're allowed to be racist, especially in America. But what they don't understand is that because of how the system worked, we ended up being more oppressive in the North region, in New York and Boston, than anyone else, because it's like, that's who they made police these neighborhoods and things like that.
New Zealand is a very interesting example of this because the Maoris fucked up the British, right? They scared the ever-living shit out of them, and New Zealand has integrated their white culture with their native culture, and their language is actually a mixture of both native and English. Like, there are certain words that they use in New Zealand English that are actually Maori words, which is super, super interesting. But it's because they've accepted what they did in history, and they've moved forward understanding their history.
Yeah,
and
that's getting past the 10th stage of genocide, which is denial.
Yes. And that's that, I think, is probably the best example that I can give to someone about this sort of discussion of race. And what I think would help America heal more is when white Americans admit what they've did, what white colonizers from England have done in history, and been like, yeah, it was fucked up. Like, Australia should do this immediately. Like, the government has apologized, right? The government doesn't give a fuck. They just did that to save face. Like, the British government and the Australian government literally kidnapped Aboriginal children and placed them with white families.
And that's something they did in every native culture.
They were civilizing them. Like, the whole thing is fucked.
They do it with Uyghurs right now. And what about, do they do that with Kurds? Have you heard about stuff like that?
Yeah. If you've ever heard of, like, the Dersim genocide or massacre in Turkey, like, after they would slaughter the families, they would make sure to keep the kids and give them to Turkish soldiers to raise them with those families. And
so, like, for Americas, it was always like the if there was someone who was a really, really good fighter and was actually like, and it took a lot to put that person down, you know, in the genocide, their kids would be the first ones that they get out of that culture and erase their identity. But yeah, that is a big thing, is getting past the denial. So America has it's both rated as a stage 6 polarization on Genocide Watch, and then stage 10 for Genocide Watch. But the stage 10 is specifically about the native genocide, because a lot of people have accepted what have happened to Black America. It hasn't been politically, and there's pockets of people who still have a long way to go. But when it comes to the Native Americans, technically the genocide only ended in the 90s when child separation stopped. And now the Supreme Court just overturned these things where it's going to affect every reservation in the country. They're literally destroying Native reservations in the Supreme Court right now. So the genocide is just going to start, going back down to extermination. You can't even get over the denial of that.
That was an interesting topic, actually. One of the last classes I took before my graduation was the politics of genocide, and the opportunity to have a teacher who is a big journalist in this topic. And one of the last things we talked about was Native Americans. The whole class was very sensitive about defining what exactly was a genocide, and he was very weary of labeling what happened to the Native Americans as a genocide. More so like a prolonged.
Well, what I will say is that technically there was a certain point where we started recognizing and preventing genocide, and there was a point before that. So there's that for starters. and I also want to say that I'm not minimizing anyone's struggles. I'm saying that there was a genocide against, Africans very clearly, and not by just Americans, everyone. But it's just that there's a lot of indigenous genocide that's going on and goes on every day, and it's being silenced throughout the world.
No, of course. That's why I find it interesting what people define or not define as genocide, or in their eyes, what they see as genocide.
Well,
because to a lot of people,
it differently.
Right? Yeah.
You mentioned the 9/11 attacks. So I was curious, when in the years following that, did you see a solidification in your identity, or did you see a feeling of wanting to get away from it?
I think I felt even more attachment to my identity, because right after 9/11, there wasn't a huge influx of migrants yet. So personal experience, I was, hate crimed and dealt with a lot of racism. And I think it pushed me more towards my identity, pushed me more towards not wanting to confide in whatever, white Americans thought I should act or be like.
To conform.
To conform to.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I just wanted to bring up, according to the UN, what the definition of genocide is, all right? And this is very specifically are the words in whole or in part. In the present Convention of Genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, killing members, causing serious bodily or mentally harms, deliberately inflicting conditions, as in starvation, for example, or anything that brings about physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children from one group to another. So, pretty clear what genocide is.
Anything about language?
No. Well, that would be section here, section C. Deliberately inflicting on a group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
Yeah.
Language is more of a soft genocide thing.
Yes. Yeah. It's like the beginning.
If someone's being tased or something, I don't know what's going on over there.
I know, sorry. Language doesn't count, which is crazy, because I feel like that's one of the easiest ways to
destroy an identity.
Identity is language, and with obviously the Kurdish population, it's been. I mean, I know we talked, or I know you guys briefly talked about Kurds in Iran and Turkey who are unable to speak Kurdish, but even in Kirkuk, it was illegal. My father wasn't allowed to grow up speaking Kurdish. He was forced to speak Turkmen and Arabic. So, and I mean, they weren't allowed to have Kurdish names. So, I mean, that also goes to show it's not even in regions you think it would happen.
So what Jack was touching on, I wanted to phrase it in more of a comedic way. When did people start figuring out what a Kurd is? What kind of responses have people had when you say, I'm Kurdish? How do they say, like, what is that? That type of thing.
Yeah, I almost wanted to laugh. I don't think most people know what a Kurd is when they ask in the US. It's very hard, and sometimes it's just not worth explaining anymore. But I have noticed if people were in the military, they immediately know what a Kurd is and they just like
the same thing goes for Chechens, but it's for a different reason.
Yeah. No, there's a flood of compliments. If anybody knows who a Kurd is, it's just a flood of compliments about how we're such great fighters. That's about it.
Yeah. That's all that matters to the military.
Yeah.
Well, the United States military has fucked the Kurds over so many times too.
Yeah.
Like, I think you could probably YouTube a video, top 10 times the U.S. military fucked over the Kurds, and you would probably get a top 10 video on it.
You probably would.
Yeah, which is like ironic that they're telling me, oh, Kurds are great fighters. We love the Kurds. And I'm like, oh, thanks. I know exactly what you did. But there was one time I actually had I went to the doctor's office, and the x-ray tech basically asked me like, oh, I saw your last name and I just wanted to ask what you were. and I told him I was Kurdish, and this was the only time I've had this experience. He basically told me that he went on a trip to Turkey, because obviously people who don't know the Middle East have this amazing view of Turkey, and he's like,
they're NATO members, of course.
Yeah, NATO members. And he was like, well, my idea of Turkey and Kurds changed so drastically when I went to Turkey. I actually got the opportunity to talk to a couple of Kurds, and he said my mind was completely blown. I have like nothing but the utmost respect for Kurds, and it really made me rethink about how I traveled and where I traveled to. So that was like maybe one of the only experiences I've ever had where it was a very nice, heartwarming experience to have that conversation with somebody.
Do you advocate for international recognition from like the UN, but like basically any country really?
Yes.
Like, is that a big part of it? Do you think that would help at all?
I think so, because I mean we're the largest stateless group in the world, right? And most people in the U.S. Have never heard what a Kurd is, Kurdistan, any regional issues. Of course, they know what Iraqis are, Turks, Iranians, Syrians, but they've never heard what a Kurd is. I mean, it's a large group of people, you know?
I mean, let's be real. Most Americans probably couldn't find Melbourne on a map, so...
True.
So I mean,
most Americans can't even pick the states out if you don't label them.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But it's a different thing. That's different. It's a different thing of not recognizing where it is on the map and not even recognizing the name. Yeah, at all. It's different, you know.
No, you make a really good point. It's more concerning because it's clearly, it's not commonplace. You don't see the major news channels talking about Kurdistan. You might see
they did for a minute.
Yeah, you might see them mention Kurdistan.
They only mentioned them because of ISIS.
Yeah, because ISIS sends missiles, or the IRGC.
I mean, it's true. Also, I forgot, you just reminded me. Most Americans, if they've heard of Kurds, the only recognition they have to it is ISIS, which is like. I mean, I'm glad that maybe we get the recognition for fighting ISIS, but I mean, Kurds are beyond just fighters, you know?
I feel like there's a good PR move for the Kurdish people with the YPJ. I think that's a good PR. There was a push to be like, hey, here's this all-female fighting force, right? I feel like that's something that would go over pretty well in the current climate. I feel like that would get recognition
going over
out.
Well. Yeah. When people were cared about the conflict because ISIS was there.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, if they've heard of Peshmerga, they know of YPJ, right? And it's a good start point, but I don't like using that narrative because a lot of people use it as a point of, as far as women's rights in the Middle East, and they say, oh, the Middle East is so backwards. Except for the Kurds, we're so progressive, or so secular, or so whatever. Yeah. I hate using that point because they kind of use it against other Middle Easterners.
You're taking one part where women have been uplifted in one small section, and you're applying it everywhere else. Lebanon's pretty great for women too. Got a lot of problems with Iran, but so do the Kurdish countries. They have plenty of problems too, And Jordan's pretty good. There's a lot of countries that are actually very progressive in the Middle East, besides Israel.
Everybody loves comparing the Kurds to Israelis.
Yes, I know.
It is nice that the YPJ is getting some recognition. They do deserve more, actually.
So I think the one issue, because when I was doing a bit of research, I saw there was some pushback from the Kurdish people specifically about the coverage of the YPJ, because there was that really, really pretty girl that was heralded by the media for a while. And it's like
she was underage.
Yeah, she was 17 at the time, I think, and she was killed at 18. And they're like, "Oh, this girl's gorgeous." It's like, one, she's 17. Two, you clearly don't understand what the YPJ is if you're objectifying her. Right? They're kind of radical feminists.
Kids that pick up guns at 14, 13.
Even if that initial discussion is not a good outcome, it's a good jumping off point to start discussing the
Yeah.
Kurdish
There was
people.
this whole thing where they were given like different fighters nicknames, like it's like Kurdish Jolie, Kurdish Rihanna.
I mean,
And-
I think if anything, women, it's the easiest thing for men or media to objectify a woman first, right? Before talking about
Sure.
anything she accomplishes.
It's attention grabbing, right? At the end of the day, the
Mhm.
media's a business. They're after money. They want clicks. That's
Yeah,
and
they have
that's
an
the worst
agenda.
part. Yeah, exactly. And that's the worst part is that you can't get past this with the media, and you're always going to find this because it's the easiest way to get clicks. You know, rebels in Middle East fight off Iran is not a headline that people are going to click. But you say
Yeah.
pretty female fighter from Middle East, right? People are going to click the shit out of that. It's just it's media psychology, but it's kind of hard to change because that's just the way the media is at the moment.
YPJ did actually use the fact that women were fighting for propaganda, but it's a completely
Of course.
different way they were approaching it. It already shows you that there's a right way to do it. And if you just like took the example, there's like all these like great pictures where they're like standing in formation with their rifles. There's so many great things you could pick for these people. The last thing that you should be doing when you're looking at people who are repelling a genocide is talking about how hot they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just how it is. One of my favorite photos from YPJ though is a female fighter breastfeeding her child. That's one of my. It was on my Twitter for a very long time. It's one of my favorite photos.
I don't think I've seen that one. That sounds...
Before we got in here, I was saying that there was a clown on my feed because he was buying into a lot of the Turkish propaganda. Heavy really got into this with underage fighters. So we've already covered this before, but it's just even knowing about the conflict by proxy.
It kind of ties in well with the discussion you guys were talking about. Are the leaders the problem? As far as like Erdogan and stuff like that. I mean, if you replace Erdogan, just another one will show up. If you replace Assad, it'll be another one. The issue is not entirely the leaders. It's the way people already perceive us or perceive people within the Middle East. You know, time and history is a whole different realm when it comes to the Middle East, right?
Yeah,
So,
and I was just saying that it would be a very bad thing for people to drum up this Jack, you want to help me out? I can't pronounce a word.
secretarian.
It's sectarian.
Yes. So if they keep drumming that up and Assad goes down and the Arabs take over the Alawite government, it would be very, very tragic if that ended up being bad for the Kurds because of this propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking about the government itself, it's the same thing in Iraq. Like, how, when you talk about minorities in a region, right? Saddam was a Sunni leader in a majority Shia region, and Assad is an Alawite in a majority Sunni region. It's just interesting how these minority groups, even the power play in these minority groups and how they even function, you know? And that Kurds are like in these sectarian issues, right? When you talk about Iraq, it's Sunni Shia versus Kurds. Or in Syria, it's Alawite Sunnis versus the Kurds. It's funny how, like, even though these are sectarian issues, like religious sectarian issues, Kurds are somehow also combined into these.
Propaganda that just appeared on my feed that I was making fun of. You go look on the comments, and this guy he's against Assad. He defends the Syrian rebels, right? But him posting this thing, there's people with the Ayatollah as their profile picture liking his post. You can see that it's an agenda that suits both sides.
For sure. You pick and choose what suits you best, or what suits them best.
I wanted to talk about Kirkuk. How attached is your identity to that, and how did it feel seeing it be abandoned by, your supposed leaders? Not technically yours, because, you're...
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
I mean, I'm still an Iraqi citizen, so...
Okay, so you got a dual citizenship?
Yeah. Kirkuk has a very, very special place in my heart. Like, I'm very attached to the identity because it's a very interesting identity to have in northern Iraq. Like, it's a very mixed society, like it's Arabs, Turkmen, and Kurds. And you're constantly in this exchange between Iraq and Kurdistan, right? And we have these like large, my username is Baba Gurguri, which is a famous oil field in Kirkuk. I have a huge attachment to it. The reason I have such an attachment to it is it's constantly, like they also call Kirkuk like the heart of Kurdistan. Kirkuk and Ahmed, Diyarbakir. Just because how constant it's like split in between these wars. Like it's the epitome of the Kurdish struggle. So it's an interesting movie to have.
Yeah, speaking about oil fields, another thing that they falsely attribute to, they kind of put the opposed philosophy on all Kurds, even though it's a very diverse people, is the radical environmentalism as well. So being in a city that's completely dependent on an oil economy, and how do they view green energy?
I mean, there are some people who are concerned with climate change, right? But I don't know if I'm the best person to speak on that, considering I have not been able to get inside my own city for like 10 years. But I am going to be able to on this trip. But I think people are more concerned with the situation going on, them being captured by Iraq and the oil fields and resources taken from them, that they can't even think about how they feel about climate change, green energy, and stuff like that.
I guess that is kind of obvious now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking, because there's like Australia is a great example with the coal miners. We have it here in America, the West Virginia coal miners and stuff.
Learn to code.
Yeah. And it's like the coal mines are killing them, but they still love coal. They love the coal industry because they're like...
I mean, it's
that loyalty to the coal industry.
It's all they've ever known. That's the other thing, right?
Of course, like Kirkuk, like we're famous for the oil, right? I think Baba Gurgur can produce like 1,000 barrels a day or something, like upwards of that. So people have a huge attachment, like they are the oil city. But people understand they also don't want to be reliant on gas, and people are now starting to think how bad it is for the environment. But I mean, they don't even control the oil fields. So it's like, if you don't even control the city you live in, that's not even your top priority at the moment.
So other places, especially Holler, when Kirkuk was captured, it deeply affected their economy. People sometimes didn't get salaries. So since Kirkuk is technically in Iraq now, do they face the same economic hardship?
In where? Kirkuk?
In Kirkuk. Yeah. Because you still have the oil money there, so...
They still have the oil money, but when it's owned by corrupt leaders and they damage the oil field to the point where they can't produce any more oil, it's kind of hard, right? And Hawler, they were having to ask Iraq for salary money. It got so bad that, KRG claimed that they don't even have enough money to give salary to Hawleris. So let alone Kirkukis having to receive salary from Iraq because the KRG can't help them anymore. It's a tough situation. Salary right now is a very, very sensitive topic because last year, might be inaccurate, but I think it was like 40 to 60% of people's salaries were withheld, and they were forced to ask Iraq to give salary. So it's a very sensitive topic about corruption right now with the KRG. And how they feel like they have to be reliant now to the Iraqi government, which what's the point of having the KRG if we have to be reliant on Iraq's government to give us money?
It's dependency. It's not so autonomous anymore, is it?
Yeah, it's not so autonomous, but what can you do? Like, you're trying to fight for independency, but at the same time you have to feed your children. What comes more important to you at that point, the fight for liberation or being able to live day to day?
And that's what happens in Rojava, and that's why people have propaganda that they're on the side of Assad in Iran.
It's like, no, we're not on the side. So for some people, it's like, no, they hate Iraq with a living passion, but what can they do if they need the money? Do you take money from the enemy and, give into the salary and help them? Or do you, stick with the liberation and kind of.
It's
say
a
no to
pretty
this,
hard
but-
question, which is
Yeah.
why I think a centralized government making that decision is probably not the smartest idea. But
For sure
you know,
not.
it's as you said, it's kind of hard. It's kind of a hard decision to make because
Hmm.
where are they going to be left? They're going to
Yeah.
be left in the middle of another fight, or like what's the end result here if they go, well, no. I mean, they're gonna see people in their own movement rise up, and then you've also there's another element that has to be, I guess, quelled. It's
Yeah.
also pretty interesting that Kurdistan is facing similar issues that the rest of the world is facing.
Of course.
I think that's
Kurdistan,
very,
yeah.
very interesting.
You'll find out most of the world's problems everyone is facing, and it's
Together,
unfortunate that there's no alignment. So
And
one
it's
of the
hard
things.
to, right? Sorry, you just made
All
me
I
remember-
was gonna say
Oh.
is in the West, it's hard to understand Kurdistan because they have this liberty or death mindset, but they haven't done shit. You know, so they cling to this mindset, but they haven't been in that position, and you know they would break under that. And that's all I just wanted to say.
The Yan Kurdistan, Yan Naman, Yan give me Kurdistan or give me extinction. It's hard for the Kurds, but it's hard too, right? Because it's the conversation of government, right, and nation states. It's like for Kurds, it's hard for Kurds because you don't want to speak bad about your government because you don't want to give outsiders a reason to believe we don't want a government, right?
That's a very good point.
But
That's something that we haven't heard yet. So
yeah, it's like you don't want to give out. I hate talking about internal Kurdish conflicts because you don't want to give people like Iraqis or Turks or Iranians a reason to say, look, they can't even control themselves. But at the same time,
people don't know that the Taliban is split in half right now. So
yeah,
it's going well for them.
As much as we don't agree with having a centralized government, you need it to show your neighboring states, that look, we can create a stabilized government that's better for the individuals who live here.
And I mean, Anarcho-Kurdistan, though. How are we feeling about that?
Anarcho-government.
Anarcho-Kurdistan.
It would be beautiful in theory. Would it work? I don't know.
This Western anarchists are so cringe anyway. But the thing that they don't realize is that how quickly warlordism goes into effect. And it's like you just can't overthrow the government and say, do whatever. It's like,
of course,
that's one of the things that happened in Afghanistan when the Soviets pulled out, and it was like one of the worst places on earth when that happened.
It needs it's a cultural shift. I think it's more that which
they don't understand it in the West. I don't think.
No,
because they have this liberty or death mindset, and they don't actually understand things. Like the anarchist community in the West on Twitter broke down talking about medicine supply chains. And like, meanwhile, I know exactly how Easy LN gets medicine in and out of their autonomous zone. Like, I know exactly how it works. And you look at the native reservations that are going to be disappearing soon, and they're allowed to exist on the US dollar, and they can use our roads. So, there's all these different things inside autonomy that's better to seek than just warlordism.
It's a hard subject to talk about, autonomy, because it's something that isn't really successful because there's always some dickhead who tries to take ultimate control, and
when the Supreme Court overturns your autonomy,
it ultimately spirals into the same thing that always happens. So it almost needs a cultural shift completely, and I think Kurdistan has that culture to be able to do it, but they're just in such a shit position that it's not necessarily falling to the same issues, but facing separate issues that we are not familiar with at all. And I think that us, and this is why we wanted to talk to people specifically from Kurdistan, because there's only so much information that you can get from people in the West who don't actually know, right? Like, and this is why I'm not making any assertions. I'm asking questions because I'm curious, right? I'm curious because these are questions that I want answered, and that I feel like I'm not going to get appropriate answers from if I ask anyone in a Western country. Even if they're a quote unquote expert in the subject, it's your word means nothing. I'd rather talk to someone who lives there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. just autonomy is such a hard topic in Kurdistan to debate. And like you said, it's like some people just will never understand because we're obviously a group, but when you live in 4 separate countries and these countries design for you to hate each other, there's no unition to even create like a common liberation movement for autonomy, right? And then if the UN doesn't want to recognize you, or if these bigger states don't want to ally with you in fear of these countries that are occupying your region, how do you even get to that conversation? Through international law means, or through, you know, actual war to liberate these regions? Like the sweep in the early 90s for like semi-autonomy in northern Iraq is as far as it got, right? But Barzani clan, they don't even want to liberate Kurdistan. They just want to liberate Badini people of Barzan.
Yeah, he wants to. The referendum is a total piece of shit, fake thing.
Well, that's when they sold.
He's just trying to get his own power. He's trying to put Kurdistan underneath him. Fuck the referendum isn't real. And it's unfortunate.
Can cook right after it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about just the anarchist identity in Kurdistan, but before that, I wanted to touch on things where you'll see travel YouTubers go to Kurdistan, and it's always Kurds blowing up on them because they're like, I went to Iraq, and they never go down into Iraq at all. It's just Kurdistan, and they're like, it's so nice here.
Are you like adding yes theory and stuff like that?
How do you feel about that type of thing going on?
It's so annoying when people are like, I traveled to Iraq for 7 days and you won't believe how safe it is and how nice people are. First of all, I hate when people are like, I'm gonna show you around Iraq, and it's Sulaimani. It's like it's so annoying because I mean Kurds live there, right? It's Kurdistan, but they don't want to admit it. I don't know. I think because the Iraq, like the no safe Iraq, is just like a louder hit to the on the statement when you like, oh my god, what is the title?
But then it's I'll see one. It always gets represented to me, and it's like this blonde guy, and he's got a scarf, and he's like on his knees with his arms out, and there's like light coming in behind him, and gold letters across the top says Iraq, and it's like, I traveled to Iraq, and then in like colons he had to add Kurdistan because he was getting dragged
Iraqi
so hard.
Yeah, he had to go back and change it to Iraqi Kurdistan.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. He still doesn't say it in the video. It was like, fuck you, pal.
Fuck you.
But there's that one ginger guy. He was actually, I haven't watched it yet, but when he went down with the Taliban, and they were very accommodating to him. And like he was open about his Christianity, but it's that one ginger guy. He did a pretty good video. I think his name's Drew something. He did a good video in Kurdistan, and it opens with them talking about how they're the largest ethnic group without a country. Talks about, he even gets into the flag. Like, so I've seen some good stuff on it, but these travel YouTubers, it's like genocide tourism because they'll go to Yemen and stuff like that. It's fucked up, dude. You're generating money from people's tragedy.
I mean, it's hard to, it's same thing goes with, like, Turkish shows, right? When they shoot shows in Mardin, and they're like, look how beautiful Turkish palaces are. It's like, that's a Kurdish castle in a Kurdish city that's been occupied by Turkey. If it's not, like you said, if it's not genocide, like, flat-out genocide, it's erasing culture, it's erasing identity. Which they've done in books and in language, and now like with traveling, which is the worst, right? Like at least you want to be known. Like in this world, money buys everything. So if like you can get monetization and like media coverage through these people, like through these travelers, you're not getting it through there, which is like probably like one of the best ways if you can get media coverage or if you can get the public to understand.
The anarchist identity in Kurdistan, I wouldn't be an anarchist if it wasn't for Kurdistan and Lebanon. So I wanted to talk about how common that identity is and what would you define their general ideology. You know how we've been talking about not applying ideology to an entire group. We're going to apply ideology to an entire group just to get a baseline here.
Oh, well, I wish I could speak for like Iranian Kurds and Turkish Kurds because I think Turkish Kurds have a way different perspective than like Iraqi Kurds do or like Syrian Kurds, right? But the new generation of Iraqi Kurdistan is a little messed up when it comes to how we view ourselves and like what we see for a country, government, no government. Um, I think the really sad part is what I've noticed is people are so hopeless, like so incredibly hopeless that it's hard for them to. I mean, this is from my experience. This is from like
Well, we
what
have
I've
two other
yeah.
people's experiences as well.
Yeah. So I don't know how other people have viewed it, but the way I've tried to
Exactly like that.
I've tried to ask people's perspective because for me it's really important to understand like how do you view the future of becoming a country, and people are just so hopeless. They don't even want to define if they want to be an anarchist. Do they believe in regional government? What do they believe in? It's really sad. I mean, in some cases, people believe like maybe anarchy may like for them there is a justification in getting a government, right? It's to show these neighboring countries that we deserve autonomy in a nation state, right? And a government will help do that. And then in other situations, people believe they don't even care about the future state of Kurdistan because they're hopeless. Like, it's non-existent. It will never happen. So might as well get out while you can and leave it the way it is. I don't know if that really answered the question.
No, yeah, absolutely.
The opinions of the other two were exactly that, hopelessness. Which is really, it's really disappointing, but nihilism's very hot right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
I'm against nihilism.
If you've asked the perspective of our parents, it'd be completely different, right? People joined Peshmerga, like my parents' perspective. People would join Peshmerga for free. It wasn't a salary based. You go there for free. You fight because you really believed in the liberation of your country. No matter how. I mean, I've had family members who are got sent hits. Like Saddam would send hits out for my family members. They would be tortured, raped, whatever, and they would never go against their idea of free Kurdistan.
It's at a turning point, I think. I think that there was a turning point before, and I think it could be approaching another turning point. Whether that's towards a less optimistic, or that's towards the other way, time will tell. But
Syria and Iran, their governments might completely fall, right?
Yeah.
Iraq is kind of in turmoil, but at least they're kind of on their own. The Americans are out. Iran going down will help there a lot too, but then Saudi will have more control. Whatever. But the point is that around you, people getting freedom can only benefit you. So that's why it's important, and I try to get through to a lot of Syrians because it's very hard for them because Turkey seems like the only one helping them. Now I have the perfect thing to say is that it's just them trying to rebuild the Ottoman Empire. But it's hard for me to get through to them to let them know that it's like if you support their freedom, it helps your freedom.
If you come here, like kids don't even speak Kurdish. They are like willingly speaking Turkish or English. It's like they don't even want to learn Kurdish.
That's why in Ireland, learning Gaelic, I should say, is it's mandatory. Most people don't really know how to speak it. They can say a few words, but it's mandatory to learn it in school. And it's specifically not there are some places where they completely speak it, but the main language of Ireland is English. But the whole reason for that is that the language is preservation of culture and identity, and they don't want that language to disappear.
And that goes back to like, let's say like my dad's generation, where my grandpa would force my dad to sit down and speak Kurdish with him in the house because it was illegal to speak it outside, right? So to preserve the language. But my dad's generation was very fearful of pushing that onto their kids. Same thing with Iranian Kurds. They're terrified of pushing that language to their kids. Like For what reason? I don't, like, for fear. It makes sense. But then now this generation, my generation, being Kurdish isn't cool, Turkey did a great job with the propaganda, and saying, Turkish is a cool language to learn. Speak Turkish.
Do you know Turkish?
Me? No, unfortunately, I do not.
Good
my
job.
dad speaks.
Good for you.
My dad, yeah. No. Actually, the reason I said unfortunately I do not is because this is one reason. Okay, when I went to university, there was like this huge influx of international Turkish students, and like the only reason I want to speak Turkish is to bother them, is to say something to them. That's the only reason I would ever, my dad speaks fluent Turkish and Turkmen, and it is just so fun watching my dad completely annihilate Turks with whatever he's saying, just pop off on them. And that's the only reason I would want to learn the language, is just to have that pure satisfaction of bothering them. It just brings me pure joy to be a troll to Turks. That is that. I have such pure joy in that, and I can't even be a troll. It's not as fun English.
Yeah, still a rivalry between Ireland and England, and it's more of ironically we joke about it. It's those times are over. We don't really care about the past. Time will come. There's no going back from the point that we achieved.
But that's how the West views time, right? You're able to now the US and England are great allies with each other, which is how, if you think about it in the sense of Middle East, the way we view time.
It was Sadat and Israel was crazy.
Yeah, Sadat and Israel. Well, I mean, he got
all right, what is it? Sadat and Begum, I should say.
But he got assassinated for it,
Yeah, I know. I almost said it's one of my favorite points in history, but I meant to say I like to read about that point in history.
Yeah. People were very upset. Time doesn't work the same way in the Middle East. One thing we're very good about is holding a grudge. I don't care how far away. I don't even care if it was 1,500. Yeah. They don't let feuds go. And that's the problem. I don't know if that you could take that as a good or bad thing in the Middle East, but they don't let feuds go. And it's a huge reason why countries won't progress. It's still ongoing. How are you supposed to progress with a country who's still doing this?
I think that's purposely intentional. And this is something that I've learned getting in touch with my own culture, is that that is the first weapon of imperialism. And so even in America, look at the polarization we have between political parties.
Isn't that what deems your political views? One is what your family's beliefs are, you're very influenced by your parents, and then two is your surroundings.
Yeah, well, I'm not influenced by my parents at all, so
neither am I. My dad's a union boss, or was.
I don't know, my parents are oh my god, my parents are so liberal.
I love this story my mom told me. My dad voted for Carter, and his dad called him a communist for voting for Carter. So there was at one point where he was voting Democrat and things like that, but it doesn't matter because we live in New York, so it doesn't bother me. Their opinions don't matter. If they're in a blue state, your opinion just doesn't matter. If you want to engage in the culture war and be angry in your own house watching the TV, Dad, go ahead. I don't know
if New York's the same as California. Only 3 cities are blue, and those 3 cities make the blue of the state.
There's a line going across the Erie Canal, basically. It's how we depopulated the people of the Longhouses. We used the Erie Canal because it connected the Great Lakes to New York City. So it was a highway going straight through the state. So all the cities developed along that line. So there's literally a blue line going through the state, and then there's some rural populations where they'll be mixed. But New York City is unstoppable. It doesn't matter. So a lot of people want New York City to be its own thing, and that's the thing. Is it's for New Yorkers to have more autonomy. New York City needs to be its own state.
New York City autonomous zone.
Yeah, California should also be split in 2. Texas should be split in 3. But nothing's going to happen in this country. So
Texas will secede before anything happens.
Haven't they tried and failed like multiple times?
I don't think so.
Just
Not like
just the
actually tried?
racists. Just
Well,
the racists. What are they going to be?
about this,
Mexican? You know, like. It's like
well, talking about this, there was that proposed state of Jefferson, which was Northern California, parts of Oregon merging with what's the irrelevant state next to Oregon?
Idaho.
Idaho. Yeah, they wanted to expand into Idaho and make a greater Idaho, which is kind of interesting. And then there was another one where they
Montana
wanted to
as well. Montana. It's
Yeah.
like so the Northwest is very interesting because there's a split between white supremacists and immigrants because it's on a coastline. So you
Oregon's
see
very
that right in
racist.
Seattle and Portland. It's like that. It's the coastline where you have people who are immigrated and progressive, and then like when slavery ended in the South. And there was more integration among the races. There were so many racists who went up to the Northwest and tried to start an all-white state and things like that. So
Oregon is literally
that's
meant to be an all-white state. Like, that's a thing. Oregon's wild.
that's why Portland is so crazy. That's why the protests get so crazy, because the cops literally are from one side of the spectrum where they're descending from these people who, like you said, you do get influenced by your parents and the things around you. The libertarians love to talk about Ruby Ridge, and it's like it was totally like a white supremacist type thing where they wanted to get out of this culture and they overstepped and shot a bunch of people.
Shooting people? No, that never happens.
Well, it doesn't happen that much in America, at least not to whites.
Although we might see an increase of it with those new border rules. Now that there's, they can just breach the Fourth Amendment and go into people's houses within 100 kilometers of the borders and airports, so that's cool. Happy for Americans there.
Yeah,
Privacy.
like I said earlier.
And Biden's talking about fucking right of privacy. Get fucked.
I was talking about earlier that giving other people freedom only increases your own.
Mm-hmm.
And it's ironic that the people cheering on what is happening right now are the so-called freedom defenders.
I've seen a bunch of anarchist Twitter going off about anarchists defending gun laws and the state and police and abortion laws and all this stuff. It's like,
I hate Western anarchists so much, man.
I was gonna say about the freedom thing, like giving people more freedom helps your own, but in the U.S. is in a little flip. Like in high school, I remember learning that your freedom starts, or your freedom ends when another person's freedom starts.
that's not
Like-
Yeah, that's because the U.S. is wrong. The U.S. is wrong.
I'm saying that's the way the U.S.
that's because they're wrong.
Yeah, grew
They're
up
wrong.
learning it.
They don't.
Yeah.
They think Ayn Rand is unironically based.
Yeah.
I was talking to he's a dentist in Afghanistan. He's a really nice guy, and so he said he's very against liberalism, as a lot of people are in societies. And he said something about liberalism, and I commented something about like, yeah, man, haven't you read Ayn Rand? I haven't, because I have a life to live. And he didn't know who she was, and I was like so overjoyed to tell him about Ayn Rand and like how awful it is. You know, Marco Rubio has a boat named the Fountainhead.
Seriously?
Yes.
every like unwillingly, I always find out information about Marco Rubio that like I just was unwilling information, like every day. Like every day, I
don't even know where he is. What state is he? What state
He's
is he?
Texas senator, is he not?
Texas,
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, my cats are about to start fighting.
Oh, that's fine. We're about done here. We just want to wrap with our
We're talking shit.
wrap with our little question about Kurdish identity and what you see.
Yeah.
You know, a very interesting perspective is actually though that if you guys can find it, that would be fun, because most diaspora Kurds are in Europe, right? There's not that much in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Funny enough, I'm in California, but most Kurds, if they go to the U.S., Little Kurdistan, Nashville, Tennessee, and like Texas and stuff like that. Coming from a Kurdish identity,
Nashville, Tennessee. That's cool.
Nashville, Tennessee is Little Kurdistan. It's called Little Kurdistan. So Kurdish society is like, my parents are very open-minded. Like most of them are, you know, in US terms, democratic liberal people. So combining like Kurdish identity with like being born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, with a huge Kurdish community, I mean, that would be an interesting perspective that I can't give to you. Sorry, guys.
That would be very interesting. I wish I knew that when I was in Tennessee. That would have been interesting.
But
yeah, there's a huge.
What about you personally? How do you what do you think being Kurdish means to you? What is the identity to you?
I mean, I'm like, have you guys ever seen those memes where it's like a Palestinian can't go 2 seconds without telling you they're from Palestine?
It's like a vegan.
Like,
Yeah,
have you
vegans,
seen those
yeah.
memes? Or like vegans or whatever.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
that. I am like 3/4 of my personality is Kurdistan, and the other 1/4 is like something else that has to do with Kurdistan. Like the Kurdish identity means a lot to me.
Do you think you embrace it more because you're technically diaspora?
Yeah, you know, funny enough, like the weirdest people tried to take that identity away from me, like you're not American enough, you're not Kurdish enough. I never really felt that. My family isn't like that. But like very funny enough, like weird like side like in-laws or like weird random people that I've never met in my life who like their feelings and ideas mean nothing to me. They'll be like, why do you have a Kurdish identity? You're American. So I don't know.
Yeah, that is very strange. Well, that sort of leads me to a follow-up question, because we obviously, with the other two, we couldn't ask this question specifically, but how much of America do you incorporate into your identity existence?
I can't say like, oh, I'm completely... Obviously, I grew up in the West, right? So I can't say, oh, I have no Western culture in me. Of course I do, you know? But I think for me, and this isn't, I mean, it's funny because if you grew up like where there was a small population of Kurds and Iraqis, and they really much so try to immerse themselves into American culture, trying to get away from their, you know, Middle Eastern identity.
And it probably didn't help at the time that there was a lot of Middle Eastern racism.
It didn't help at all. You know, like for me, like getting hate crimed or, you know, being threatened at school by teachers to get withheld from classes or grades or having racist teachers, like there was like a fear instilled in you to have this American mindset. But I don't know.
Assimilation. You felt like forced assimilation.
Yeah. But
So literally you're actually experiencing the same thing everyone else is.
Yeah.
Your culture is being erased in the same way.
Basically. Essentially, like trying to, because my mom didn't speak English. So, you know, scaring my mom and dad, telling them, you know, your daughter's going to get withheld from school if you don't stop speaking Kurdish to her.
Jesus.
Right? It's a similar tactic, you know, but in a different way. Which is funny because my dad is like so funny. My dad is like lava. If anybody hits you at school, you punch them 10 times harder. I don't even. He's like, if you don't come back with like expulsion papers in your hand, like you're not my daughter anymore. So
that's funny.
I think you know, assimilation can like really push that like fight or flight. For me, it was very much so.
You have the melting pot of America, you know.
Yeah.
It's like there's a big difference between melting and assimilation, and then also you said San Diego, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of Latinos there as well.
Yeah, and something.
So is there as do you see? Here's a racy question again, but do you see kind of the same thing where they talk to the Latinos saying you can't speak Spanish?
Okay, this is gonna be really funny, but I grew up in a Spanish immersion school, so like from like preschool to 3rd grade, I just spoke Spanish at school until they shut down that school for lack of funding, and then I got merged into what I was talking about, that very racist environment.
Mm.
So it depends. Like if San Diego's only, depending on where you are, like Chula Vista and San Isidro, they're only a couple minutes away from the border. Some people don't. majority of that city doesn't even speak English, or like there's a lack of English. So it depends what city you live in. If you,
So that's what's so bizarre to me, is specifically because you're in San Diego.
But San Diego's also a Navy-based city, right? So if you live in like Clan T, it's like KKK members still live there. If you lived in El Cajon, which
America's such a wild fucking country.
Isn't it crazy? Like, you could literally live in the same city or like county, and then city to city is so drastic.
So I have a follow-up question.
Oh yeah.
Despite all that assimilation and racism and that sort of stuff, do you still speak Kurdish in the home?
Yes, I still speak Kurdish at home.
Okay.
Yeah.
So realistically, like, it's an external pressure, but at the end of the day, you guys are still speaking Kurdish.
I mean, it was a push and pull with my father. So scared that we would lose jobs or lose friends or not have.
How much of the issues in Kurdistan right now where they assimilate to Iraq and Iran?
I mean, I wouldn't say Iraq there's a huge there's a transfer assimilation, because northern Iraq is pretty separated from southern Iraq.
At this point.
Yeah, it's pretty disconnected since the early 90s. We've had the sense of autonomy. Not like actual autonomy, but this feeling of it. It wasn't until recently a lot of like central and southern Iraqis are starting to move into northern Iraq. But I would say Turkey and Iran and Syria are like very vulnerable to getting assimilated. It's not the same. Like here in northern Iraq, like we have the right to speak Kurdish, right? Like our schools are taught in Kurdish. People speak Kurdish. You're surrounded by Kurds. You're allowed to say you're a Kurd, right? Because there's not, like, you're disconnected from the rest of Iraq. But it's not the same where you're immersed and assimilated into the culture, like Turkey or whatnot. So I would say not that much.
Interesting.
You know what? I remembered what I have been forgetting to ask, because we got into it. We got into it right before I jumped on and had to go live. The PKK.
Oh yeah. Oh, I was gonna say about my perspective before you ask about the PKK. My dad, maybe not outing my dad, but the reason we moved back and forth is a lot of Kurds were offered jobs during the Iraq War to be translators and cultural advisors. So it's a very interesting experience to have when you're in between that.
As far as the PKK goes, you were asking me, because I said I don't support them because I don't support any group. Were you confrontational when you were like, why don't you support them? Or
yeah, okay. I was very scared that you guys were gonna think I was coming off as confrontational when I was like, why don't you support the PKK? I really could care less. Okay. Like it was just out of curiosity. It's different coming from you than from you guys, like you two, and then like somebody else saying like I don't support PKK. And then like throwing up a gray wolf sign. Then it's like, oh, you don't support the PKK?
This right here. So I call this we call this the Turkish fascist salute. But it's also, if you've ever watched wrestling, there was a wrestling stable called the Wolf Pack where they would do this hand signal. So thankfully Americans it hasn't integrated into America. They don't understand what that signal means.
I imagine being like such like a puny little like fascist group, like that's your symbol for fascism, is like this like little wolf sound, like this little wolf.
Bork. We're gonna get banned for Nazi symbolism now.